Hi, folks. Jeff Davis here with myscgop.com. A lot of you have been reaching out to us lately asking for training on Robert's Rules of Order. Why would people be doing that? It's because this past July at the state convention, we witnessed the Rhino establishment leadership of the SCGOP use Robert's Rules of Order as a weapon against the America First MAGA Patriot agenda here in the great state of South Carolina. We're rolling out some live trainings here in the near future, but in the interim, we pulled some archive footage from March of 2021, which we think will be very helpful. This training was conducted by Judge Rob Chumley. Judge Chumley is a former magistrates judge, lawyer, great patriot out of Spartanburg County, good friend of our cause, and we've also linked his materials in the comment section below. If you're also interested in participating and being part of our statewide parliamentarian team as part of Reorg 2023 and Capture SC, please reach out to us at team@myscgop.com, team@myscgop.com. We're looking for expert parliamentarians in all 46 counties of the state of South Carolina. So please reach out to us if you'd like to help us fight back against the Rhino establishment in the state of South Carolina.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Hear you fine, Rob.
Okay, great. We can go through this, and we're going to try and reduce it down to the bare essentials so that you can get the most bang for your buck, so to speak. As y'all indicated, the rules of order, Robert's Rules of Order, the manual itself is pretty thick. It's probably about 3 inches thick if you get a manual. There's no way that most people can digest all that material and all that information. So what I've done over the years is I've got a booklet here that I really recommend. It's called A Parliamentary Guide for Church Leaders. And I found it probably 25 years ago, and it's by a gentleman named Barry McCarty. And what he does is he takes all the primary information and reduces it down to about 20 motions. Now, that's not everything that's in the manual, but I'm going to be honest with you. If you understand these 20 motions and you know when to use these 20 motions, you know about 99% of everything that you need to know to deal in a deliberative body. So that's kind of what we're going to go over. Let me ask you this before we get going really good, Presley and Jeff, how much time do you really want to allot, or how much time would you like for me to go into this? Because we could go as long as everybody, as long as we need from now on if we need to, but I know you've got a time limit. So what do y'all have in mind?
Presley, I'll leave that to you. Rob, my thought was, we would 15, 30 minutes, and then we would go into Q&A.
Yeah,
okay.
I was thinking that. I'm kind of reminded of the Far Side cartoon where the big kid's sitting in the back of the class with the little head, and he eventually raises his hand and says, "Teacher, may I excuse my head's full." So, yeah,
well, you're right.
20 to 30 minutes is good, Rob.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can go through it as quick as we can then. There are some advantages, of course, to doing it through Zoom because we're reaching into all over the state doing it this way. Some of the obvious disadvantages is, of course, that Robert's Rules is designed for an assembly. And so we lose a little bit of that because we're not all assembled. But what we're going to do here, I think, and it's the easiest thing to do is I'm going to go over some of these motions with you and define them and tell you when to use them. And I think that's probably the best way that we could do it. So a couple of quick things, and I would encourage you to jot down a couple of notes if you get a chance. First of all, I want to tell you that Robert's Rules, a lot of people tell you a little quick story. I remember one time I was in a meeting years ago, and Robert was, but the gentleman's name was Mr. Henry Robert, and he designed a manual probably about 150 years ago because he was asked one time to preside over a meeting, and it didn't go well. And he said that would never happen again, so he designed these rules to kind of control debate and control the group. And Mr. Robert, by the way, was a South Carolinian. So any body that you find yourself in, any deliberative body, any group, any organization, they always have the default rules as Robert's Rules of Procedure. And that comes from Mr. Henry Robert, who was originally a South Carolinian. So it's something else that you can kind of have. It's kind of a little anecdotal piece of information. But the first thing we want to talk about is there are 4 classes of motions that you want to keep in mind. And here's what they are. And I want you to just kind of keep these in mind. The first is what we call privileged motions. The second is what we call subsidiary motions. And then the third are what are called incidental motions. Now, the fourth class is called restorative motions, and we won't worry about those for our purposes. We're only going to deal with the first three because that's generally what you deal with in a group to get things done. Now, I want you to keep this in mind. First thing we want to do is we want to number these. And the first one I want to give you is called fix the time at which to adjourn. So you can jot that down. That's the first one. And number these in the order that I'm going to give them to you. The second one is adjourn. The third one is recess. The fourth one is a question of privilege. The fifth one is call for the orders of the day. The sixth one is lay on the table. The seventh is what we refer to as previous question. The eighth is limit or extend debate. The ninth is postpone to a certain time. The 10th is commit or refer. The 11th is amend. The 12th is postpone indefinitely. And the 13th is what we call the main motion. Now, those are the first 13 that we want to talk about, and they need to be numbered in that order. Now, before we go any further, did everybody get all 13 of those?
Will these be, Jeff, will these be on the website?
We're taking notes quickly as well, and we're going to have this recorded, and we will have this, on Thursday. We'll put it up on the PowerPoint or whatnot, and then we'll add this to the website. Yes, we will add this. But as Judge Chumley said, I mean, I like taking notes. That's how we learn and the such. But we'll do that for everybody as well. Catch up.
Can you repeat number 8 and 9, please?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. We'll take all the time that we need. And like Jeff said, I think this is good because we won't wear your hand out writing. It's not going to be a lot of writing, but we just want to kind of jot this down and kind of put it in this order because this is the order of precedence, and that's what we need to remember. And you said 8 and 9. You wanted 8 and 9 repeated?
Please,
Yes.
7 too.
Okay. 7 is previous question. 8 is limit or extend debate. And 9 is postpone to a certain time. Okay, everybody good so far?
Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, 1 through 5, I want you to label those as privileged motions. And 6 through 13, label those as subsidiary motions. Now, we want to talk about 3 basic things with these motions. And we'll go on and we'll finish up in just a minute with the last 7. But before we get to the last 7, let's talk about these. There's 3 basic things you need to know about each motion. You want to know what the definition of each motion is. You want to know how it's used, when you can bring it up, how it's used, and then the order, the precedence that you can use it in. Now, don't be overwhelmed by parliamentary law. It's really not as complicated as you might think. Think of it like an auction. Everybody's been to an auction, right? When you go to an auction, first thing the auctioneer does is they start off the bidding, let's say at $100. Okay? If $100 is what's being considered until somebody says, I'll give $120. Okay, well, $120 is now what's being considered. And if they don't get $120, where do you go back to? You go back to the $100, right? Well, think of motions in the same way. When you look at these, look, for example, at let's say number 11, amend. Amend is higher in precedence than the main motion. The main motion down there is the substance of what the body's discussing. Let's say the question in a group is whether to give $500 to the underprivileged children's fund. That would be a question. That's a substantive issue that needs to be voted on and debated and discussed in a body. That would be your main motion. Everything else is what you do to the main motion. So the higher you get in precedence, the higher it gets as far as the discussion goes. So let's say, for example, somebody makes the motion that they want to give $500 to the underprivileged children's fund. Okay, that's the main motion. Somebody can say, well, I'd like to offer an amendment. And that amendment is that we make it $600. Okay, so the amendment is higher in order, in precedence. So the amendment has to be discussed first. So if the member offers, let's say, $600 to give to the fund, then that has to be debated, and then they have to decide if it's going to be $500 or $600. So the amendment is discussed first. Afterwards, then you go back and vote on the main motion. That explains to you the order of precedence. So this is what happens here. Now, where parliamentary strategy comes into play, and this may come up, as Jeff mentioned a minute ago, it's very possible that you'll go to your precinct meeting. It'll be very informal. There won't be any real formal rules used, and you won't need this. But if you have some information, any information you have is better than none. I'll give you a quick example. If you know just one or two motions, you probably know more than most people. And whenever you bring that up, you can kind of stall things, shut things down for a minute. And if you happen to be outvoted, then this gives you an opportunity to find out what's going on, slow things down, or change the direction of the meeting. And anything that you know is an advantage over most people. So that's why we want to go through it. So let's start with the first. I'm going to give you the definitions of what these are. Okay. Now, fix the time at which to adjourn. What this does is this continues business at a next special meeting. So if this motion is made and it's passed, then that means the business is brought up again at a special meeting that'll be called later. That's the definition of fix the time to which to adjourn. Okay? Now, adjourn. Adjourn means that the body ends, the meeting ends, and everybody goes home, and whatever business is being discussed is terminated. It's done. It's over. It dies. That's what happens with adjourn. So let's say you want to be strategic. Your business is making progress. You think you're going to be able to win. You've got the numbers. And all of a sudden your enemy realizes that, or your opponent realizes that, and so they make a motion to adjourn. Okay, now that's strategic. They want to end the meeting before a vote and terminate the business. Well, you can jump in there and bring a motion of higher precedence, which has to be discussed first, and you can fix the time at which to adjourn. Then if that motion passes, then of course your business does not die. It comes up again at the next meeting, the next special business meeting. So you see the strategy that you can use in knowing how to use the motions. Now let's go to the third motion. That's a recess. I think everybody understands what a recess is. That's just to delay things and take a break. Take 5. Everybody good? Everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's go to the fourth one, a question of privilege. Question of privilege is one of those things that you can bring up if it relates to the comfort, the safety, or the integrity of one of the members of the group. Let's say, for example, you come in there and you say, Mr. Chairman, the back of the room can't hear. The air conditioning is too loud. Can we please have somebody cut the air conditioning down? That would relate to the comfort or the safety of the members. Or let's say there's a fire broke out. Okay, you bring a question of privilege. That ends the meeting. Or let's say somebody just needs to go to the bathroom and take a restroom break. Okay, those are questions of privilege. Or let's say the speaker in a group stands up and says, you know what? The motion that my opponent's brought is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and I think that's because he's an idiot. Okay, that's a personal insult. You can't do that type of thing in a deliberative body, and so the person could immediately jump up and bring a question of privilege because it relates to their integrity or their reputation. So it has a pretty high precedence. So that's the purpose of a question of privilege. All right, now number 5, call for the orders of the day. The call for the orders of the day means that you are demanding that the group's agenda be followed. Oftentimes, public bodies, let's say things like school boards, they have to publish their agenda in advance and put out a written agenda a week or 2 weeks before their meeting. But once they put out that agenda, under the rules, they have to follow their agenda. Unless, of course, somebody calls for suspending the rules. But if not, if nobody's called for suspending the rules and then the group tries to take things out of order on the agenda, a member can call for the orders of the day, which enforces the agenda. It means they have to go by the rules. All right, number 6, lay on the table. Most people have heard of tabling something, tabling an action or tabling a motion. That's what this one is. It's lay on the table. But the purpose of lay on the table is temporary, okay? It is not appropriate to kill a motion. A lot of times you'll hear people say, we want to table it. You know, that'll get rid of it for a while, or that'll do it in. Well, it's an inappropriate use to permanently kill a motion. The purpose of laying it on the table means to set it aside temporarily to be brought back up, to be resumed shortly. So that's the purpose of lay on the table. Now, previous question. Now, this one is not intuitive because it has nothing to do with the previous question. The terminology or the title is an anachronism that dates back to 1604. It's been used for centuries, but it has nothing to do with anything previously. The purpose of previous question means that you want to vote now. And so if somebody makes a motion for the previous question, that means they want to end debate and they want to vote. They're tired of debate and they want to go ahead and go right to the vote. Now, this can easily be abused. I'll give you a quick illustration. I was in a meeting one time, probably about 25 years ago, and it was a committee that had been formed and was headed by a Spartanburg County councilman. And this committee was discussing land use. And I was using parliamentary techniques to kind of delay the committee's move because I was outvoted. I knew I was outvoted, and I couldn't stop the votes. So I kept bringing up these parliamentary motions, and it kept shutting things down. And I was able to do that for months. I was able to keep the business alive because the rest of them didn't know the rules. Well, finally, one day I had the floor, and I was speaking, and there was this irritating little man that was on the committee. And he just yelled and screamed from his seat and interrupted me and yelled, "I call the question." And I mean, he just lost his temper and just yelled because he couldn't stand the fact that I was delaying business. Now, at that time, we had a lot of people there. It was a packed room, and we knew we were outvoted. We'd held it up for months. And so at that time, we couldn't really delay the vote any longer, but that was completely out of order. You call the previous question, but you cannot interrupt the speaker. And you have to bring this up, and it requires a vote in order to end debate. So we'll talk about that just a little more shortly. But people are in the habit, and you may have heard this in groups where people yell, "Call the question," or "question." That doesn't work. You can't interrupt the speaker to do it, and it has to have a vote in order to go forward to end debate. But that's what the purpose is of previous question. If the group wants to end debate, they can and go to a vote. Now, limit or extend debate. A deliberative body can decide how long they want to debate an issue beforehand. They can limit it to a certain number of speakers. They can limit each speaker to, let's say, 5 or 10 minutes. Or they can say, we're only going to allow this amount allotted time for people to speak across the board. It's up to the group. It depends on how the motion is phrased. But limit or extend debate means exactly that. You've set it up to where it's only a certain amount of time that you're going to consider it. Now, the next one, number 9, postpone to a certain time. Postpone to a certain time means that you simply want to delay it. And it means exactly what it says. You do want to postpone it, but to a later meeting. Now, if something's postponed, that means it becomes one of 3 things. It either becomes a general order, a special order, or the special order. Now, once it's postponed, it comes up at the next business meeting. If it's a general order, then it comes up when there's nothing else pending, no other business pending. If it's been postponed as a special order, that means, of course, that it preempts other things and comes up at a certain time, even if there's other business pending. If you postpone to a certain time and it's the special order, that means it's the first item of business at the next business meeting. So what that does, of course, is just postpone it to the next business meeting. Now, commit or refer. Most people have heard of this one. It simply means you want to send it to a committee, refer it to a committee, or commit it to a certain group for further consideration. And so that's the purpose of that. Then, of course, we have amend. And to amend, everybody knows what that one means. That means you want to make changes to the main motion, just like we used a minute ago. You want to change it in some way. Now, there are 4 ways to amend a motion. You can strike out words, you can add words, you can strike and add, or you can substitute another motion. But the amendment does have to be germane to the topic. It can't be something completely different. And it can be hostile to the main motion, but it has to be done in a way that is relative to what's going on, okay? You can't simply invert it and destroy it, okay? Now, the last one there is postpone indefinitely. Postpone indefinitely kills the motion. If a postpone indefinitely motion is passed, then the main motion is dead. And then, of course, number 13 is the main motion. This is the substance that the group is discussing. Now, let me ask you a quick question, and just as a little quick recap. Let's say we have the motion that we discussed a minute ago, and it is to give $500 to the Underprivileged Children's Fund. And somebody jumps up and says, you know what? I make a motion and we postpone it indefinitely. That would kill the main motion. Now, here's my question. Why would you want to do that rather than simply voting no on the main motion? Any ideas?
Because you don't want to vote on the motion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good point. What the motion postpone indefinitely does is twofold. It allows the opposition to kill a motion without going on record as being against it. So let's say the folks want to deny the $500 to the Underprivileged Children's Fund, but they don't want to go on record as voting no to that motion. So they say, you know what, we simply voted to postpone it indefinitely. So that way they don't go on record as being opposed to it. So it looks better. Another thing that it does is it gives the opposition 2 opportunities to kill it. Because if the postpone indefinitely motion fails, they still have an opportunity to vote down the main motion when it comes up for vote. So it's a smart thing to do because it gives you 2 chances to kill the motion. But also, the first motion, the postpone indefinitely, allows you to gauge the strength of your opposition because you still have an opportunity to kill it, but then you have on record how many people are actually against it and how many people are for it. So these are just strategies that you can use to manipulate the substance. And if you really know how to strategically use the motions, then you've got control of the business. That's what it boils down to. Now, before we go to the incidental motions, does anybody have any quick questions about the privilege and the subsidiary motions that you want to throw out right now?
Rob, let me just make one comment for everybody. A lot of folks, if you've ever watched what goes on at the State House, this is good information for what goes on at the State House. Number one, if you've been to any of the Greenville County meetings, you've probably never seen any of this stuff over the past 4 years because they literally do not do essentially, I think, any business whatsoever. There's no motions, there's no discussions, there's no new resolutions. There's nothing of that nature that's coming out of the Greenville County GOP because they want the status quo and they don't really want to upset the apple cart. Now, where if you're wanting to go to the state convention, they will utilize these rules substantially at the state convention to shut down debate, to shut down discussion. They will bring out the big guns, the big rule people. There's lots of examples. But that be prepared if you're going for state convention. I mean, if it's your first time, and even I'm not an expert at it, but we'll have other people like Rob and other folks that really know these rules well to kind of be shepherding folks and stationed across the room. Certainly at the state convention, and certainly probably at our county convention, here in Greenville and other counties, you should be working on that as well. Mm-hmm. But these are the types of things when I've made comments in these discussions in the past about, say, for example, our cause is school choice, but you'll have a legislator that sits there and runs around and campaigns and says, I support school choice. I'm all for you. I support you. But then they'll be using a rule like what Judge Chumley mentioned, to kind of kill it underneath without anybody knowing, because they didn't vote against it because the amendment or the motion got killed earlier. It is amazing the tricks of the trade that they do down there at the State House, that they will do at the state convention, and that they can do at your county convention. It may not, in all likelihood, happen at your precinct, but it will definitely happen at the county and the state level. So it's definitely good information to know, and what we're trying to battle, because the other side knows this information, and the Rhino establishment knows it, and they're using it again to kill a MAGA America First agenda. So. Sorry to interrupt.
Excellent. I'm glad you brought that up, Jeff, because you're exactly right. The bylaws or the constitution of the organization, whatever it is, if it's a convention, if it's whatever group it is, if it's a party, their bylaws should specify what rules of procedure are used. And if they don't specify, almost always, in fact, I would go as far as to say 100% of the time, it's always Robert's Rules of Procedure or the default rules of procedure. Now, the only time that might vary at all is in the South Carolina General Assembly. Each house, the Senate or the House, they own their own rules of procedure. They have their own manual, which is called legislative procedure, and those rules are slightly different, but not in a major way. If you understand Robert's Rules of Procedure, you would understand the rules that are used in South Carolina's legislative bodies too. But this gives you an opportunity, even down to church deacon boards, when you have business going on. And most of the time, if everybody is in a good mood and everything's going great and there's nothing controversial on the calendar, there's no reason to use these. But when something comes along, you need to know the rules, because that's when you have command of the business. So it's always Robert's Rules is usually what's always used, and you can always defer to that. Now, what we want to do is go to the last group. This is the 7 last motions, and these are what we call the incidental motions. And I want to go ahead and give you these, and we'll take the quick definitions of those. The first one is the point of order. Probably, we'll come back to it, probably the most powerful motion that you can have. Shuts down business immediately at any time. One person can use it. They can interrupt the speaker, and there's no vote taken on it. One person can use point of order and shut down the business of a convention or an assembly with saying point of order. Now, you can't just yell it. I mean, you can, but you do need to have some substance behind it, because the chairman's going to want to know what your point of order is as soon as you bring it up. But one person can use that. The next one is what we call the appeal. The appeal refers to appealing the rulings of the chairman. The chairman presides at any convention or in any assembly, but you can always appeal the ruling of the chairman. The reason this is, any of you that have ever heard me talk about sovereignty or speak on sovereignty, you know that the people of the state are sovereign. Well, in a legislative body or a deliberative body or an assembly of any kind, the members, the people, are sovereign. They can always overrule the chairman, and that's done through the appeal. The third one is what we call the parliamentary inquiry. A parliamentary inquiry is asking the question, what are we doing here? Where are we? What motion is being considered? Because it's easy to get confused. Parliamentarians even have to usually keep a pad and a pen with an arrow so they can keep up with what motion is on the floor and what's actually being discussed. It's easy for members to get confused. So you can always bring a parliamentary inquiry, and that question is basically asking procedurally, what are we doing procedurally? What motion is being discussed? Where are we here? That's the purpose of that one. The next one is called the point of information. The point of information is sort of the flip side of the parliamentary inquiry. The point of information is asking substantively what's going on. In other words, it's a factual question about the business. Let's use our example again. We want to give $500 to the Underprivileged Children's Fund. Okay? A factual point of information. Point of information would be somebody rising to a point of information and say, Mr. Chairman, how much money is in the fund now? Or how much did we give last year to the Underprivileged Children's Fund? That would be a factual question, and that would be a point of information. The next one is division of the assembly. Division of the assembly is another very powerful motion. Let's say, how many of you have ever been in a group and the chairman says, all in favor say aye, and you hear a bunch of ayes, and then he says, all opposed, no, or nays, and you sit there and you think, you know what? I couldn't really tell the difference. It sounded like the same group of people to me. If you actually say you want a division of the assembly, what you're saying is you're demanding a rising vote. That means you're asking for a standing vote, not just a hand vote, not just a voice vote. You want to see people stand so they can be counted. That way you can verify that the chairman indeed did call it correctly and the vote went the way you thought it went. The next one is division of the question. Division of the question means that, let's say the motion is too complicated in your mind and you want to divide it up. Let's say that somebody makes the motion that they want to give $500 to the Underprivileged Children's Fund and $200 to the Orphans Fund. You might say, well, I'd like a division of the question. Let's vote on those separately. Let's on the $500 question and on the $200 question. So division of the question would simply divide it up and make it two motions or two questions to be considered instead of one. And then the last one is suspend the rules. Now, this is something where it generally relates to the rules that are procedural. A body can't suspend its bylaws, and it can't suspend rules that relate to members or absentees. But procedurally, they can suspend the rules. Generally, it relates to an agenda, but that motion can be entertained to suspend the rules. Now, these last seven, these incidental motions, they are very important because once they're brought up, if one of them is brought up, they have to be dealt with immediately. That's the important thing to remember about the incidental motions. Now, the last thing that I want to tell you about all the motions, and then I think we'll have pretty well covered it, is this. Question you want to ask yourself about each of these motions is this. When you offer these motions, can you interrupt the speaker? Does it require a second? Is it amendable? Is it debatable? And what vote is required to pass this motion? And what we want to do at this point is I want to tell you, we'll go down each one, and I'm going to tell you whether you can interrupt the speaker, whether it requires a second, whether it's amendable, whether it's debatable, and what vote is required. Okay? So the first one, let's go back. Let's start back with the privilege motions. Let's go back and talk about fix the time at which to adjourn. On that one, you may not interrupt the speaker. It does require a second. It is amendable. It is not debatable. And it requires a majority to pass. Now let's go to adjourn. For adjourn, you may not interrupt the speaker. It does require a second. It is not amendable. It is not debatable. And it requires a majority to pass. So for example, on that one, let's say you're discussing business, the hour is late, and somebody brings the motion to adjourn. They can't interrupt the speaker. That means whoever has the floor finishes with their time. And if they've made that motion to adjourn, they do have to have a second in order to go forward. But at that point, it's not amendable, it's not debatable. As soon as the second is given, you have to vote on that motion. And only a majority passes the motion to adjourn. Okay? Now let's go look at the third one there, recess. For a motion to recess, you may not interrupt the speaker. It does require a second. It is amendable. It is not debatable. And it requires a majority to pass. Now let's go to a question of privilege. Question of privilege, you may interrupt the speaker. It does not require a second. It is not amendable. It's not debatable. And there is no vote taken. Now, if you think about it, it just makes sense. It's intuitive. Because think about the purpose of the question of privilege. Remember what it does? It relates to the comfort, the integrity, or the safety of members. So let's say the speaker's up there and he's insulting personally the previous speaker. Well, that guy can jump up and rise to a question of privilege, which means he can interrupt the speaker as he should be able to, because he's being personally insulted. And it doesn't require a second. It's not amendable. It's not debatable. And there's no vote taken. The chair should immediately entertain a motion and correct the problem. So you can tell by the definition why it doesn't require a vote. Now let's take a look at call for the orders of the day. Call for the orders of the day. You can interrupt the speaker. It does not require a second. It is not amendable. It is not debatable. And there is no vote taken on it. Now let's look at the lay on the table motion or tabling. For that one, you may not interrupt the speaker, and it does require a second. It is not amendable, it's not debatable, and it requires a majority to pass. So again, you've got the main motion on the floor, you're discussing it, and somebody makes the motion to lay it on the table. They can't interrupt the speaker. They're going to have to wait till the speaker finishes with the business, and they're going to have to get a second in order to get a vote. Now let's go back to the previous question. Okay, somebody can move the previous question. Remember that one. That ends the debate and goes to a vote. As I told you, remember the example I gave you for the guy that I had to deal with that time of interrupting me, screaming from his seat? So you can see it's totally inappropriate. For a previous question, you cannot interrupt the speaker. Whoever has the floor has the floor. Okay, and it does require a second. So if somebody's had it, they don't want to go with the debate anymore, they want to vote, they're still going to have to get a second to make the motion for the previous question. And it is not amendable, it's not debatable, and to end debate and vote with previous question, it requires a 2/3 vote. Now, limit or extend debate. For limit or extend debate, you may not interrupt the speaker. It does require a second. It is amendable. It is not debatable. And it requires a 2/3 vote to pass. Now, postpone to a certain time. Postpone to a certain time, you may not interrupt the speaker. It does require a second. It is amendable. It is debatable. And it requires a majority to pass. Now, commit or refer to a committee. You may not interrupt the speaker with this motion. It does require a second. It is amendable. It is debatable. And it requires a majority to pass. Now, the motion to amend. You may not interrupt the speaker with this motion either. It requires a second. It itself is amendable. It is debatable. And it requires a majority to pass. So let's use that one for an example. Again, let's say that our main motion is to give the $500 to the Children's Fund. And somebody says, well, I'd like to amend that to make it $1,000. Okay, that's an amendment. Okay, they can't interrupt the speaker. They're going to have to wait till the speaker finishes before they can make their motion. It has to be made at the appropriate time. They'll have to have a second in order to proceed with it. And then itself can be amended, so it can be changed. And then it has to be debated. And then it has to pass by a majority vote or fail for lack of a majority. Now remember, postpone indefinitely. This is a way to kill the motion. You may not interrupt the speaker with this motion. It requires a second. It is not amendable. It is debatable, and it requires a majority to pass. Now, remember, the privilege and the subsidiary motions, the key to all of those is their order of precedence. And you see the main motion, the substance, is at the lowest level of precedence, not in importance, but because everything else is something that is done to the main motion and has to be dealt with first. So you come down, just like we said with the auction, to that. Now, the incidental motions, let's look at them. They don't have a number beside them because any incidental motion raised has to be dealt with immediately. That's where your real power is in a body. If you see things going bad for you, if things are turning the wrong way quickly, then you probably want to bring an incidental motion if you want to slow things down. Now let's take the point of order. Point of order, you can interrupt the speaker. So let's say the group or the chairman is violating the rules. Well, a member can rise to a point of order and bring the point of order to the chairman's attention. So obviously they can interrupt the speaker. They can interrupt the chairman. And a point of order does not require a second. It's not amendable. It's not debatable. And there's no vote taken. So a point of order has to be dealt with immediately. And the point should be corrected if it's well taken by the chair. Now, how about appeal? Let's say your chairman rules against you and says your point of order is not well taken. What do? And you're sitting there and you know that you know the rules and that you're correct, and the chairman has just ruled against you. Well, where's the sovereignty? It's not with the officers, it's with the members, it's with the body. So you can appeal. You can appeal rulings of the chairman, but keep in mind, an appeal needs to be done immediately, as soon as the chairman makes his ruling. If the appeal is not made as soon as the chairman makes his ruling and business proceeds, then the opportunity for appeal is gone. So you need to bring that motion to appeal quickly. And you can interrupt the speaker with the appeal. The appeal, however, requires a second. It is not amendable. It is debatable, and it requires a majority to pass. So if you bring the appeal, the chairman can himself be overruled if he is out of order. Now, parliamentary inquiry. With that one, remember, you're trying to find out procedurally what's going on. So you can interrupt the speaker. It does not require a second. It's not amendable. It's not debatable, and there's no vote taken. The chairman should immediately just answer the question, where we are, what motion is pending, where we are in the process. Now, point of information. Remember, that's substantive. It's relating to the business directly. With that one, you can interrupt the speaker. It does not require a second. It's not amendable. It's not debatable, and there's no vote taken on that one as well. Now, division of the assembly. Okay, you want a rising vote. You want to verify that the vote was as the chairman announced. You can interrupt the speaker with a division of the assembly. There is no second required. It is not amendable. It's not debatable, and there's no vote taken. Under Robert's rules, you can require a standing vote. Now, division of the question. Remember, division of the question is to separate two potential questions into two or more motions. With division of the question, you cannot interrupt the speaker. It does require a second. It is amendable. It is not debatable, and it requires a majority to pass. Now, suspending the rules. With suspending the rules, you cannot interrupt the speaker. It does require a second. It is not amendable. It's not debatable, and it requires a 2/3 vote to pass. So what we've done here now is we basically covered these 20 motions, which, as I said before, will cover probably 99% of any situation that you'll ever come across in a meeting. We've talked about what the motions are, what their definition is, how they can be used, when you can use them, and what their order of precedence is. So I know that's a quick thumbnail sketch. We could talk about this and Presley knows we've gone over this. We've spent an entire day going over this before. It's probably, when was that, Presley? 10 years ago, 15 years ago now. It's been a while, but
it was only about 5 or 6 years ago, Rob. But
okay.
Well, whatever. But I will say, Judge, you do offer a great course. That it's about a 5 or 6 hour course, and we'll look to do one of those later in the year because it is very helpful.
And what this does now is this just kind of gives you a little thumbnail overall, and like I said, it kind of gives you the definitions of it and when you can use them. And of course, we'll if anybody has any questions or anything that you need clarified, we can certainly do that. But this gives you a good grasp of it. And as I said, any information you have puts you probably further ahead than most people. I'm just finished with this. I remember when I was probably 10 years old, I went to a meeting with my dad, and it was a crowded room. It was something they were doing in Spartanburg County. I was pretty young. I don't even remember what the issue was, but it was very controversial, and the room was packed with people, and it was just pandemonium. And I remember my dad yelling "point of order" during the meeting, and it's just like it just shut everything down. So if you have any information or any command of any of these motions, you're going to be further ahead than most people, and it's going to give you an advantage in the meeting.
Robin, one thing I wanted to say, this is Justin Alexander, on the motion for division, and I only interrupt this because this is one that we see constantly. What will happen a lot of times is that the chairman will make a motion that he wants to pass, expects to pass. There'll be a quick vote, and then he will say, okay, it passed. The time that you have to call that division, where you have to say, I don't think it's clear who won that voice vote, is before he makes that announcement, before he says who won. So use that division liberally, because the chairman will hear amazing things. The chairman will hear things that are impossible to hear. Yeah. And so strike while the iron is hot, and use it frequently.
And it does depend, be as familiar as you can with the bylaws of the organization. Sometimes you have things that are specified, but under Robert's rules, that's right. You can call for division of the assembly so that you can see a standing vote. It gives people an opportunity to kind of take 5 and count and make sure, that that's there. And also that brings back, the appeal. The assembly always has the authority to overrule the chairman. And that's just because the assembly controls itself. And that's what we believe. That's freedom. That's the people having the control. So know the rules and use them appropriately. Good point, Justin.
Hey, Judge Presley here. Obviously, at these county meetings, one of the main things that's going to be accomplished is the election of the new chairman and EC and an officer or two. One of the tactics I've seen is that they try to close down nominations very quickly. So where we don't get caught flat-footed, how do you propose that we don't let that happen to us?
Well, the first thing that I would do is, and you may have already done this, is just be as familiar as you can with the party's rules on how nominations are taken. And because that's going to tell you a lot. If you've got those in hand and you've got these rules, then you can always bring that up and slow things down if you feel like there's a point of order. And you can also be familiar with exactly the procedure if you know the bylaws and how they're going to move forward with those nominations. But it's not going to hurt anything to now this, it may not be practical to write down everything, but if you've got a little notepad and a pen, if there's some way you can kind of jot things down, especially if there's a long debate, so that you can keep in mind what motions are on the floor, and that way it doesn't hurt. That way you know where you are. but I would certainly be as familiar as possible with the process, the party's process and rules for nominating and electing officers.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just so everybody knows, when you're at the convention, there's probably out of 72 people, maybe one or two that kind of really enjoy this, maybe more. But there'll be some folks that you actually, it's like a battle plan. This is these are your parliamentarian Robert's Rules specialists that are literally standing next to a microphone. As Justin said, when the chairman, there's a voice vote. And the chairman here, you got 90% of the people say yay and 5% say nay, but the chairman says, oh, the nays have it. There's going to be somebody standing, you assign that responsibility right next to a microphone to sit there and say you're calling for a division of the assembly. So everyone, the people that are yays can stand up, the people that are nays can stand up or stay seated or however it would work. And then you could visually tell, so it kind of keeps the leadership, the chairman, honest. And I guess as Judge Chumley mentioned, you could call an appeal if he was to close it down and call it real quick before somebody got to a microphone. So if you're interested in this, especially if you're here in Greenville or whatnot, and want to join us in there, but if you're working in a different county, find some folks that can be your leaders on the Robert's Rules piece, and even just these 20 motions will probably save the day. So
yeah, and what we'll try to do Thursday night, something you can do when everybody's there together in one group is I like to try and come up with a little mock question and assign a chairman and a parliamentarian and a secretary and kind of try and get the question through, because when you put them in order and you actually try to exercise, it's when you really memorize and learn the rules. That helps a lot.
Right.
Question?
Yes, go ahead with the question.
Yeah, my name's John. I'm out of Edgefield.
Yes, sir.